revista Forbes publica a lista dos 20 homens mais ricos do Brasil? Eu sinceramente, não. As pessoas dizem que eu estou radical, não estou radical. Eu estou mais humano. Eu aprendi na cadeia a ser mais humano. Eu refleti mais. Eu medi, sabe, meus 70 anos de vida para poder saber que eu preciso lutar mais, eu preciso brigar mais. Sabe, eu preciso... Você não pode aceitar a ideia que a elite brasileira não aceita o crescimento econômico do mais pobre. Não aceita que o pobre tenha direito à saúde, à educação, à água, à escola. Tudo aquilo que é elementar. Eles não aceitam que o pobre tenha. Então, eu não estou mais radical, Brian. Eu estou com muito mais consciência política. E por isso que eu quero brigar muito mais. Ah, mas o Lula vai voltar, o Lula saiu da cadeia nervoso, o Lula saiu da cadeia, ele quer polarizar. Eu quero polarizar mesmo. Eu quero fazer um debate ideológico mais a fundo. Sabe? Eu quero que as pessoas saibam que não existe nenhum, sabe, ensinamento que a pessoa tem que ficar 3 dias sem comer. Não existe nenhum ensinamento que a pessoa possa levantar de manhã e não ter um copo de leite e um pão para dar para o seu filho, num país rico como esse. Então é por isso que eu pareço que estou mais nervoso, pareço que estou radical, mas não estou. Eu sou um homem que eu gosto de conversar, gosto de negociar, aprendi a fazer política negociando, mas eu não quero ser mais enganado. E quero fazer com que o povo brasileiro levante a cabeça. Levante a cabeça. Sabe, o cara que está trabalhando no Uber, sabe, ele tem que saber que ele merece uma coisa melhor do que o Uber. O cara que está entregando pizza de bicicleta, ele tem que saber que ele merece uma coisa melhor. O cidadão que está dormindo na calçada, ele tem que saber que ele não precisa dormir na calçada. O Estado tem obrigação com ele. Senão, para que Estado? Então é assim, meu caro Daniel, que eu termino agradecendo a entrevista. É sempre muito difícil porque eu não falo inglês e você não fala português. Mas eu acho que quando a gente fala a verdade, a gente fala um pouco com a alma e com os olhos, e eu acho que as pessoas percebem. Eu sou, a minha crença popular, eu aprendi com a minha mãe. Toda vez que você estiver conversando com um ser humano, olhe nos olhos dele. Porque a verdade não é dita pela boca, a verdade é dita pelos olhos.
Welcome everybody to episode 80 of Left Reckoning, where we say left is best and Lula Livre, baby.
Left is best and Lula Livre, absolutely.
How's it going, Matt?
It's going well. I'm going to cut the intro there. People might notice my audio quality is a little bit different today because my USB audio interface decided to die right before the show, which I'm a little bit annoyed about, but we'll maintain a sort of pleasant demeanor despite that. But I am doing really well, mainly because we get to talk Lula today. I couldn't find the video of him doing leg presses. That was a close second for. I found a GIF of it, but it wasn't enough for me to do as a cold open. So if anyone could find that, that'd be just hook me up.
We can put it up in the post game. I mean, again, I think people should definitely check out that interview with Brian Mier and Michael Brooks and Lula there, which was it was a really great interview. And also, I very much remember getting a call from Michael right after it happened, and him specifically highlighting that last bit where Lula says, "My mother taught me to look people's in the eyes because truth is spoken with the eyes, not the mouth." So it's sweet to be able to see that in the video form.
Lula's a sweet guy, very emotional, like what he said after Michael's passing, but also that, like lamenting that after they were talking for, I don't remember exactly how long they went, like 40 minutes or so, like lamenting that they can, there is a language barrier, but that he's still making a connection. And also, like, I love what he says right before that, saying, we want to polarize things. We want to have sharp ideological conversation along the lines of the Uber drivers and pizza delivery people realize that they deserve better, and people that like without homes realize that that's a state obligation to them. And I mean, how can you say it better?
No, I think so. Well, y'all, we have a damn exciting show for everybody today. In just a little bit, we're going to be joined by Brian Mier of Brasil Wire TeleSur English to talk about Lula's campaign, which officially launched this morning, as we are all watching with bated breath as he takes on the horrific clown fascist in Bolsonaro. We'll be talking a little bit about the economic situation in Brazil, Bolsonaro's very serious claims and threats against democracy in Brazil. And Brian gives us a sense of how he thinks that campaign is going to be run, and also potentially what a third term of a Lula administration would be looking like as well. A little bit later in the show, Matt, who's calling in from the International Space Station, will be breaking down the long and fascinating history of Tulsi Gabbard, which a lot of people forget. Some of the skeletons in the closet there.
Yeah, I mean, I always thought, like, I'm an old Tulsi head. I know about the time when she was, mainly known for saying Obama won't talk about radical Islamic terror enough. And little did I know that, no, there was like a whole nother album before that one, which is the father-daughter act of like gay extremists are attacking our rights with all their marriage demands. So yeah, I went on a little deep dive, and I also want to put it in the context of her new gig, which, like we said, shouldn't be surprising to folks that she's on Fox News, but speaking on behalf of the Don't Say Gay bill, like it's all coming full circle.
And then, of course, in the post game, we'll be taking y'all's calls and also answering Discord questions. And Matt and I will be doing a pause and watch run through of Jordan Peterson's most recent message to the international globalist conspiracy. I think it'll be a hell of a lot of fun. So be sure to join us for that. Patreon.com/leftreckoning. And we'll talk about this more in the show later, so I don't want to belabor it, but don't forget, folks, that the merch store is up and running. If you want to steal Matt's fit, you can get that Left Reckoning trucker cap, the On the Road t-shirt, and also our Big Tex tank top all over there at leftreckoning.com/store. All of those shirt sales really help us continue to move the show into its next chapter, which I'm very, very excited for. But anyways, man, I think we'll have more time to talk about all of that stuff. Let's get to the opening commentary for today, which this is a subject that I don't think will be too surprising for folks who've been watching this show for a long time, or watching the Michael Brooks show either. But Elon Musk is somebody who overpromises and underdelivers, and always seems to get a huge pass. Now, we've talked about issues with Tesla. We've talked about the issues with Neuralink. But there's one company that he runs that is just a pretty exceptional disaster that I think we should spend some time talking about today. That's Elon Musk's Boring company. And it's been an absolute disaster. And just to set it up, because I don't want to waste a bunch of time making the argument about how goofy this shit is, I will just let you all watch for yourself. These are the tunnels that were built in Las Vegas, which they've been continuing to try to hype up, despite the fact that they have been an ongoing disaster since launch.
Is it boring driving down here with all of this? Oh my, there's a traffic jam.
Oh, you know what? When it's busy with new people constantly, it's not too bad. But when it's slow and you're by yourself, it kind of gets a little bit...
The future.
Just circling around constantly.
So is there often a lot of traffic here?
No, I think what's happening is the South Hall, the building doors are closed.
Oh, they are?
So no one's going to that. So I think what's going on is it's just these two, and that's why it's just constantly...
Why are they closed?
I don't know. Well, like, the building itself isn't closed, just the entrance doors are locked. I don't know why.
Genius.
Huh.
So, even dropping people off to Central if they want to go to South Hall. I don't know why.
The future of transportation is all like
Park by the South Pole.
moving around
I mean,
conventions to look at dumb shit.
still-
Drop me off.
yeah, people can still drop you off at the South Hall, but
And you're still picking people up over there.
I need a call about that because I just got a phone call saying.
Damn, man.
All right, we could. That's that's literally not even a deep dive. That's you type in loop Las Vegas. There are plenty of videos like that. I literally just picked the first one out there. But this is one of those things where it's very funny that this guy continues to fail so spectacularly publicly. It's very frustrating that it never seems to catch up with him. But I mean, this is one model of the future, frankly. If you were tired of traffic up on the street, why don't you go down underground where you could sit in a claustrophobic tiny little tube with a bunch of other rich assholes? God forbid you walk a couple of blocks, because the distance that this thing covers is laughably short. But look, this could just be a story about a rich guy's hubris and the media system that lets him get away with it, and that would be one thing. But Musk isn't just any rich guy. He's one of the richest men in the world. And he uses his money and influence to push governments into doing his bidding. And this is one of those things where it's not just that Elon Musk is somebody who you should sort of discredit or not believe as a fraud. You should treat with contempt for what he's been doing to his workers, to animals, to the environment. But this is a segment about one of the fundamental facts about our current reality, which is that billionaires are not only a threat in the sense of the inequality that they create, but they're a direct threat to democracy, right? Musk is able, because of his immense wealth and influence, is able to push governments around to do his bidding. Now, let's be very clear here that it's not like he has to do very much pushing, and this is a double crisis. It's a crisis of democracy and capitalism. But, on the show, we've talked about the Tesla scam, that overvalued and fraudulent company, its history of extreme racism in Fremont, California, which is, by the way, why he moved from California to Texas. It wasn't because he liked the weather better here. It was because he wanted to be in a regulatory environment that was going to be a little bit less likely than California, which took a very long ass time, by the way, too, to take these crises seriously in the first place. But he moved to Texas because he wanted to have a government here that was going to be less likely to intervene. We've talked about, as I mentioned a second earlier, about his despicable animal abuse in the Neuralink facilities, and also how he's built. Yes, there are scumbags in local and state governments who are willing to do this, but how he has built millions of dollars of your money from public coffers and put them into his own pockets. And in South Texas, one thing that has been very frustrating to me about how little national attention this story's gotten, in South Texas, where he has cynically used the poverty and purposeful underdevelopment of that region to effectively buy up the government there, leading to the assault and humiliation of Becca Hinojosa, a young activist who we've interviewed on this show, who was accused of the quote-unquote crime of graffitiing a reminder that Musk is not welcomed by the people in her community. She was arrested in the early hours of the morning, held for hours with no information as to what she was being charged with, denied her glasses, was effectively brought out there in her undergarments, had her mugshot posted on social media by the corrupt mayor of Brownsville, etc., right? This is all a downstream effect of this guy's outsized power. And just like we remind folks that unions aren't just about wages, they're about building democracy for working people, democracy at work. The critique of billionaires is not solely just about inequality. How can one person have so much while others have so little? And hell, there's a lot of critique that goes there. But it's also about power. Simply put, billionaires are a threat to democracy. The basic principles of democratic rule are threatened when one person has this kind of outsized power to influence and control the government, not through persuasion or convincing people to vote for the things that you want, but through the utilization of their ill-gotten concentrated resources. And the Hyperloop, or the loop system, and I'm not going to fucking waste a lot of time differentiating between these two things because they're all the same scam at the end of the day. It's not just a waste of space and resources. It's a perfect example of how outsized power of a few people leads to horrible results for the rest of us, right? Now, this isn't exactly new information, but it's been getting a lot of attention recently. Parrish Marks, who has a new book out called Road to Nowhere, What Silicon Valley Gets Wrong About the Future of Transportation, had a long piece out this month in Time magazine on Elon Musk that I suggest people read. In this piece, Marks outlines a very shocking claim about the Hyperloop. I'm going to quote it here. Elon Musk has a history of floating false solutions to the drawbacks of our over-reliance on cars that stifle efforts to give people other options. The Boring Company was supposed to solve traffic, not be the Las Vegas amusement park ride it is now. As I've written in my book, Musk admitted to his biographer, Ashley Vance, that the Hyperloop was all about trying to get legislators to cancel plans for high-speed rail in California, even though he had no plans to build it. Several years ago, Musk said that public transit was a pain in the ass, where you were surrounded by strangers, including, quote, possible serial killers, to justify his opposition. But the future sold to us by Musk and many others in Silicon Valley didn't just suit their personal preferences. They were designed to meet business needs and were the cause of just as many problems as they claimed to solve, if not more. Well, is that fair, y'all? Right? There's been a lot of people, Musk has this whole army of bots out there. No, you can't say that about Elon Musk. You're taking him out of context. Jalopnik, right, which is a not car company. It's a publication that writes on the automobile industry, reached out to Elon Musk's biographer. And this is a quote from the piece in Jalopnik. This is what the biographer said about Parrish's retelling or conception from the biography. Marx's conclusion is, quote unquote, vaguely accurate, but a disingenuous take on the situation. From Musk's biographer Ashley Vance's point of view, Musk's initial announcement on Hyperloop were more of a reaction to how underwhelming California's high-speed rail proposal was. So there you have it, right? And I think a lot of people are going to read that and be like, oh, so the biographer is basically saying this has been taken out of context. Well, no. What the biographer there is saying is actually much different than that. The question is not, did Musk pitch this or not to stop the train, but rather what were his motivations in doing so? Was it cynical to enrich himself, or was it justified because he didn't actually believe that these systems could work, right? There is no doubt at this point from the biographer that what Musk was saying there was that what Parrish Marks was sort of putting out there to the public was true, that Musk wanted Hyperloop to compete and block out the high-speed rail system because either he didn't like it or he wanted to enrich himself. And for me, I don't give a shit about what's in Elon Musk's heart. The net effect is the same here. Because the point stands that in the throes of austerity, the effect these people have, people like Musk, can be immense. Politicians in this country have absolutely no vision for the future of public investment. The best we get out of them, things like the IRA, right, the Inflation Reduction Act, is to use tax credits to push private investors, basically begging them to maybe, just maybe, do something in the interest of the public good. That system hasn't worked for us. And Musk, who's a huge beneficiary of government subsidies, is a prime example of not only of that system's failure, but the danger that they create by creating these little private fiefdoms for narcissists like Elon Musk, right? Going back to what was in the Jalopnik article, this is a quote from his biographer. On public transportation in general, his biographer noted as an aside, he's the world's richest man. He's used to his private planes, so maybe public transit is a little beneath him these days, Vance said with a chuckle. Well, very nice. Musk doesn't want to see y'all. So he's going to pitch a bunch of programs and concepts that are bound to fail to block any kind of serious public investment in building much, much needed public transportation in this country.
Yeah, you go then.
I mean, for me, it's like, it sucked when this shit was happening in California, but now this is extremely close to home, y'all. Like from Austin, and it's worse here. I'm going to be honest about it. It's worse here because the decline in power, in the decline in our democracy in Texas is so extreme. The poverty of so many of these cities is so extreme. The ability for somebody like Musk to come in there and basically get his way from small towns who maybe don't know better, but more often than not are run by these cynical scumbags who don't give a shit about looking out for the people in their community. From Austin to Pflugerville to Kyle, Texas, cities and towns and counties are being pushed these kind of fanciful and practical solutions to the very real problems that we face. When he fucking moved here, he put out all of these plans, nonsensical bullshit. Look, I'm not a geographer, but I'm going to tell you one thing about the land here. All of these incredible reservoirs that start up in the northern part of the country, they all come down to Texas. That's why, despite what a lot of people think about the Texas Hill Country where I live, it being a very dry, deserty place, it actually is filled with rivers and streams, many of which are actually popping out from, underground for the first time. That's why you can jump into rivers or public pools, right? Great product of the New Deal, Barton Springs, and the water's 60 degrees, right? The point here is that we have a very unique ecosystem here. And what's underneath the ground here? Typically limestone. Is that very good for boring through? No. But Musk doesn't give a shit about that because he has no real need to have practical experience on these things. So all across this area, he's pitching these kind of fanciful, nonsensical plans to city and local governments who are desperate for cash or desperate for attention, and don't really know what they're doing. In San Antonio, there's another one of Musk's extremely dark loop fantasies was actually picked over much more grounded ones, notably because Musk undercut all of the other bids, basically making the argument that it'll be cheaper to use my bullshit, which has not been the case. But much like what we've seen in Las Vegas, it overpromises and underdelivers. The plan is effectively to create a loop system from the airport in San Antonio to downtown San Antonio. A lot of problems with tunneling under that city, right? Not just the fact that there's a shitload of limestone and the Edwards Aquifer there, but also the fact that any kind of project like that is going to take a shitload of know-how and money and capital, something that Musk and this boring company do not have. But don't worry, y'all. Despite the fact that it's been pitched as a loop, like a hyperloop that's going to be high-speed personal vehicles that are going to be going, taking you 2-3 minutes to go from the airport to downtown. What it looks like they're going to do is going to be building another one of those dumbass tunnels like they have in Las Vegas, where people can get into a personal Tesla and sit there and then sit in traffic underground so they don't have to see the beautiful city of San Antonio and the normal people like you and I, right? It's one of those things where it's absolutely despicable that there are authority figures in the city and the transportation system there who are buying these kind of pitches in the first place. But it's also extremely damaging because this kind of thing also blocks out real plans and solutions to the transportation problems that we have.
Yeah, I mean that's the point that I just want to jump in on. Like Frederick Hayek sort of theorized about like distributed decision making, and actually you can't be.
Could you get a little closer to your mic? I know the sound's sort of messed up.
Well, it's not my mic.
There you go. It's better.
It's better now. So like this is all that stuff is out the window because where we're at now is like an aristocratic capitalism where guys like Elon Musk become sort of leaders of companies, and everyone acts like it's because of some competency. Technically, as opposed to like in business, and they get to decide the priorities, right? Like it's and to the exclusion because there's not enough room to both have all this bullshit with our mayor's meeting about hyperloops and to actually do real stuff. There's actually you can't do both. You just have to do the city stuff, and Elon Musk knows that.
No, he 100% knows that because this guy's not good at many, many things. But what he is good at is getting government contracts. And that's basically what he's made a career for himself out of doing. And look, I know a lot of people in our audience don't need to hear this, but you can already hear the chirping coming from all these folks being like, well, if they're accepting his bid, shouldn't the blame go to the governments and the different institutions that are accepting them? Absolutely, friends. Is the blame solely on Elon Musk? Absolutely not. The deals he gets from governments are absolutely criminal. And we do a lot of work on this show to call those out. If you want to see one, you can check out our interview with Bob Leibel on the absolutely criminal deal that Elon Musk got here in Travis County. But this current system of corruption and ineptitude in local governments because of the lack of democracy that we have in this country creates Elon Musk's. And Elon Musk's protect this current system to great harm to the rest of us. But look, this is not just a segment on Elon Musk. This is about the problem with billionaires in general. And let's see if I can pull this up for everybody right quick too. But from people like Peter Thiel, who've been pumping money into the hands of reactionaries like Masters and JD Vance. And by the way, y'all, this weekend, our bonus episode is going to be with Ben Burgess, who has a really excellent piece on Masters in Jackman Magazine that you can read. We're going to be having him on for a debunking the populist right. But here's the good folks over at Chapo talking a little bit about Masters.
It is a cycle or two behind Virginia in terms of turning blue. He's fucked.
He's cooked, and
honestly, Christian Sinema is going to get defeated in a primary probably in that fucking state at this point.
Well, I mean, so Mark Kelly was an astronaut, and Blake Masters. I was under the impression, I just assumed that Blake Masters was like a venture capitalist or something like that.
Too.
No, he spent his entire adult life, his entire professional life before this point, writing essays about how nice Peter Thiel was.
Yes, he is a literal loser. He is a literal courtier.
I was shocked to find this out too. He wrote a book called 0 to 1. That's like the gospel of startups with Peter Thiel, and I'd assumed that he had been a startup entrepreneur guy, but no, he got his start. This is true. He got his start. He took Peter Thiel's class at Stanford, and then started publishing the notes he took during Peter Thiel's lecture on a blog spot. And then he became the official courtier, the official kind of court scribe of Peter Thiel. And now he's running for Senate. And I thought he was a business genius.
I mean, it's very fitting because this whole Thiel project is this fantasy LARPing neo-feudal concept where we're going to bring back aristocracy, but affirmed by the algorithm instead of a Christian God. But that does mean you get a situation where the guy running as the salt of the earth populist in Arizona is the modern day equivalent of a dude wearing a white face paint with a fucking beauty mark and giant frilly outfit, pantaloons, and a big powdered wig, and sitting there with a glass of sherry talking about the king's mistress all day. That's him. That's his job. He's a fancy lad. He's a professional flatterer.
I'm sort of
Yeah, I mean, and when it comes to the crimes of Peter Thiel, maybe giving us, hilarious characters like that is not necessarily at the top. But the point is that Peter Thiel has outsized influence, beyond the impressiveness of his ideas. People are attracted to him and want to line up behind him because they know that the pipes and the money pipes will start flowing to them, right? And this is the real crisis.
And remember where Peter Thiel comes from. We did a whole segment on Peter Thiel. He also isn't this magic business genius. He was a culture warrior, talking about how there's too much, leftism in table grapes, and then he struck it big by getting on the right sort of deal, right? That's what it is. It's betting. Some people make their bets and some people don't. And when you make a bet, again, same thing with Elon Musk himself. They didn't actually. There's not a E equals MC squared that any of these guys came up with, right? It's just it's all a facade for just ownership.
And this is the fundamental point here is that one, we shouldn't want any kind of individuals to be having this kind of outsized power and influence because of the bizarre way that our economy is set up. And two, because of the bizarre way that our economy is set up, the people who do have this kind of outsized power and influence are idiots. And they're extremely dangerous folks, too, because their idiocy creates a lot of crises that are very, clearly avoidable, right? So there's people like Thiel or people like Jeff Bezos, whose attacks on workers and the environment are just too long to list. But remember one specific one that we covered on this program. Remember what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, where his company was able not only to squash that union effort there, they were able to lobby the county, the government, the representatives of the people. They were able to lobby the county to change the speed of traffic lights because pro-union people were standing outside of the facility to hand out pro-union literature to folks, basically doing canvassing work. They got the county to speed up the lights so that to basically hamper that program. That's an insane amount of power, and that's an amount of power that nobody should have. But it's not just limited to that. They moved the fucking post box underneath an Amazon banner that was very clearly being recorded and watched, where people were supposed to turn in their ballots. And they were also hiring the local police force to do off-duty security at the facility. And I don't need to give people a crash course of the history of the South to tell you why that is not just, they're just looking for security officers. That's intimidation, right? These ain't the conditions for thriving democracy. They are the conditions for authoritarianism and dictatorship. And look, not all billionaires are as loud as these guys, right? That's what's so fascinating about Musk and Thiel and Bezos, right? People who have a shitload of money typically like to disappear and be in the background. But one example, and look, this is coming from the New York Times, New Yorker kind of world of politics, right? Not particularly radical. But just one example, a study by Martin Gillens at Princeton University called The Preference Gaps in Inequality and Representation found that the policy preferences of the rich are much more represented in actual policy than those of the poor and the middle class. Now, you don't need to necessarily do that study to get why that's the case. But look, even, more mainstream, more official, institutions and organizations are putting out, the information that we all know to be true, that our democracy is effectively owned by the rich and powerful. And this is not even really getting into the question of money in politics. There's a lot more that could be said. I might just do a quick throwback to our friend Eugene Debs here, who I think has a very good quote on this crisis. Who says Eugene Debs, for people who are not familiar, was the leader of the Socialist Party of the United States. He was jailed for speaking out against the Great Imperialist War of World War I, and ran for president, and was probably one of the most successful national candidates who was a socialist for the presidency ever, before maybe Bernie Sanders. But even then, Bernie doesn't run in the general. But this is Eugene Debs saying, "I'm opposing a social order in which it is possible for one man who does absolutely nothing that is useful to amass a fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars, while millions of men and women who work all the days of their lives secure barely enough for a wretched existence." It's very simple, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of world we have is run by billionaires, and the kind of world we want means getting rid of them.
Absolutely. And that's also why we were against the crypto stuff, because if you actually read between the lines of that stuff, that was just an attempt to try to stretch this desire, like, oh, everyone can be millionaires for doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was fundamentally all the other criticisms of crypto. That one is the fundamental one. It's sick to want that, and it's sick to try to set up a society that rewards that.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're going to jump over to this conversation we had with Brian Mier, because this is a great day. It's the first day of Lula's presidential campaign in Brazil. We'll be talking Bolsonaro, his threats to democracy. And then on the other side, Matt will be breaking down the political history of Tulsi Gabbard. And then after that, we'll be jumping over the post game where Matt and I will be doing a watch and stop recap of Jordan Peterson's new video on the impossibility of knowledge. Very excited to get to all of that. But without further ado, let's bring on Brian. Welcome back, everybody. Left Reckoning. David here, as always, joined by Matt Leck.
Howdy, everyone.
Well, we're very honored to be joined today by our good friend and one of Michael's very good friends as well, Brian Mier. You know Brian Mier from TeleSur English and also from the very excellent Brasil Wire. How's it going, Brian?
Hey, guys. It's good to be back.
Well, we got a lot to get to, man. This is sort of, our introduction for our listeners about this really huge election between Lula and Bolsonaro that's coming up. Before we get into some of the details and stuff, could you just really, really briefly just set up for a particular American audience, like how the election system works for the presidential level in Brazil?
Okay, well, Brazil has 23 political parties represented in Congress. Each party gets a fund to spend on the elections based on their representation. If they don't have any representation in Congress, there's more parties. They get a tiny amount, a couple $100,000, party fund. Corporate funding is still illegal. They've tried to flexibilize it a little bit. All registered candidates for president get free commercial airtime for the 6 weeks of the official election season. The election season is much shorter. I think it would be great if they did it that way in the US, frankly. And everyone gets free airtime. So it kind of minimizes the differences in wealth between candidates. But that airtime is based on the representation in Congress. So all of the parties from coalitions, so they can take advantage of their different parties' airtime. It's complicated to explain this all in a short amount of time. It's a very different system. So starting tomorrow, the first official day of election season, at 3 times a day, there's going to be a block of political campaign commercials mandatorily run on all television stations and radio stations in the country at certain time periods. And according to the way the coalitions are mapped out, the largest coalition is going to get like 2 minutes and 45 seconds of airtime. Lula's coalition is going to get like 2 minutes and 4 seconds. The tiny Brazilian Communist Party is going to get like 7 seconds. And it just works. It works like that. But because of social media, these commercials are becoming less and less relevant or important. I think Bolsonaro himself is only going to have about 45 seconds, but he won last time with with like 20 seconds of commercial time. Then there's mandatory debates, that have to be broadcast on all the channels at the same time, except that Bolsonaro is saying he's not going to go to them because he can't speak properly, can't string together 3 sentences. That's basically how it works. So it's starting tomorrow. Tomorrow's the first time the candidates can say, I'm officially running. Before, they've had pre-campaign season before this for about 3 months, in which candidates could say, well, my coalition is running. Our coalition is running. If they decide to nominate me as their candidate as president, I'll do this and this and this. It's really just rhetoric. But it's interesting. I mean, in other words, I think there's some pretty interesting regulations around campaigning that I think the U.S. could really benefit from. Like one thing that's really good is they don't have unbridled, corporate campaign contributions. Although there's theme-based ads, there's think tanks, there's ways around it. There's buying up, bots for bombarding people on social media, chat groups and stuff like that, chat applications. There's ways around it, but it's not as easy as the U.S.
And as for the actual election, there's a first round where if you get over 50%, that's like late October. If you get over 50%.
3rd, October 2nd. So that's the way, because there's multiple candidates, right? I think there's about one candidate just dropped out. I think there's 6 or 7 candidates. So basically, it's not 50%. If one candidate has more votes than the sum of all other candidates, then he wins or she wins in the first round. So the way it's looking with the polls right now, if Lula could hit 46%, he would take it in the first round. And some polls are showing pretty close to that number. But things can change fast. So if it goes to the second round, then it's just the first and the second place candidates facing off against each other.
Well, I mean, let's get into, before we start getting like too much in the campaign, I was hoping if you could sort of paint a picture for people about what the economic situation is like in Brazil right now, particularly for working people. It's been interesting, reading up on it over the past couple of weeks, particularly in outlets like the FT, that there's a similar kind of game that's going on with the way that people are trying to portray the economic system, where there's, all this pointing towards like job numbers, but the problem is that a lot of those kind of gains are being completely eaten up by the high cost of living and inflation that people are going through. But if you could give people a sense, a general sense as to what the conditions are like in Brazil for working people, one, going into this election, and generally after a few years of Bolsonaro, a country run by Bolsonaro.
Okay, well, basically, Bolsonaro economically represents complete continuation of the economic policies of his predecessor, the coup, President Michel Temer. According to this plan that they set up in 2014 called Bridge to the Future, which looks as if it was actually drafted in Washington. It looked like a document that had been Google translated from English when it was first presented. And it's just like a laundry list of deep neoliberal austerity cuts and privatizations. So for example, they put a spending cap on health and education, which completely screwed Brazil up during the pandemic. They privatized a lot of key sectors of industry. And then shortly after taking office, 2017, they transformed Brazil into a right-to-work nation. They completely dismantled the entire labor union system. And they flexibilized the labor force. They basically put labor law back like 80 years. They flexibilized the labor force so that you don't have all the benefits that you used to have before Dilma Rousseff was thrown out, like mandatory 13th check, mandatory severance package, 1 month paid vacation, all of that stuff. So now a large part of the workforce are like temps. They made it so that you could be like a temp indefinitely. And also, they've created this stuff to facilitate the gig economy where there's no more the work week was 44 hours in Brazil, but that was thrown out with flexibilization. So now like Uber's made a policy in Brazil where Uber drivers can only work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, but many of them just go to other apps after the 12 hours. So, and because of other things related to because of implosion in consumer spending power caused by all of this weakening of the labor force and unemployment it's almost at record levels right now. The unemployment situation is really bad. This has created a chain effect where a lot of factories have shut down. Brazil's been in decline industrially since the 80s, really, but they did all these measures to slow down the decline during the Lula Dilma years, which they abandoned now. And so now, Ford Motor Company, which set up in Brazil in the 1920s, has left Brazil after 100 years almost. Fiat shutting down, Mercedes shut down its plants. There's all kinds of. I could go on and on about this. I know you're economists, but I also know we don't have that much time. But in general, the end result, I'll just say this: hunger has returned to Brazil. 45 million people are experiencing food insecurity. 20 million people are not getting 3 meals a day. 20 million children are no longer eating 3 meals a day. And that's homelessness has doubled and tripled in a lot of big cities.
Is Lula's popularity for now, is it just sort of people remembering the good times, sort of in the face of all that you're talking about there?
Well, in a way, it's kind of like remembering the good times, but it's also remembering why there were good times and what needs to be done to return it to good times. Yearly above inflation minimum salary increases, which halted when Dilma Rousseff was removed from office. Everyone remembers that. They remember how much when he took office, the minimum salary was like $49 a month in U.S. terms, and according to the dollar, when he left office, it was like $315 a month. So even though the currency Brazilian currency still was significant minimum wage increases, and that was cited as the main reason for poverty reduction. And also, people are worried that if Bolsonaro is reelected, he's going to end the affirmative action program in the universities, which sets aside 52% of university entrance positions, student positions for kids from the working class who went to public grammar school and high school, with a small differentiate for Afro-Brazilians. So now when Lula took office, 2% of the students in federal universities were Afro-Brazilian, and now they're at 56%. So, and people, Bolsonaro's been showing signs that Brazil is a majority Afro-Brazilian, majority black country, right? So, and Bolsonaro's been trying to usurp this. He's been trying to eat away at this. He's defunded all the public universities, which are all free. He's attempted on several occasions to start charging for tuition. So the students know this, young people know this. So it's not just like nostalgia for a time when world economic forces were better off or something. It's like people remember the concrete things.
I think we'll talk a little bit more about like specific policies in a second, but I did want to note that I think it was last month that the Bolsonaro government increased their welfare payments by 50%. But it's notable, one, that will expire at the end of the year. And two, I have a quote here from Paulo Pimenta, who's a congressman for the Workers' Party, who said on Twitter, the increase is nothing more than a popsicle that melts in the heat of unbridled inflation. Could you talk a little bit about this increase in workers' payment, in welfare payments, what you sort of make of it? And two, I'm just curious what the general sense is like how the Workers' Party is sort of reacting to that, because it just makes me think of something that happened here in Texas. And I don't think the Workers' Party is anything like the Democratic Party. But something happened here in Texas where some working class voters who almost always vote for the Democrat voted for Trump because of the $1,200 stimulus payment. And all that you got from Democrats was sort of finger wagging about it instead of sort of embracing it and say, no, we want to do much, much more. But I'd be curious how the PT and Lula in particular have reacted to this increase.
Well, Bolsonaro changed the Constitution to enable raising these are emergency COVID welfare payments, enabling him to increase them during during a pre-election season, right? Like that's supposed to be illegal because historically it's been interpreted as vote buying, right? And he also, in the same measure, he reduced the tax on gasoline prices. So he was able to drop gas prices by 15%. Like this week it happened. So it happened right before the elections. The Workers' Party, which always votes in a block, there's no, what's in Christian Cinema or whatever her name is, people like that, Joe Lieberman types. If you try to Joe Lieberman out the Workers' Party, you're kicked out of the party. You can't constantly vote against your party. You might get one chance and then you're gone. So they voted in a block to support the raise because the justification is people are going hungry. They need food. And some radical left, kind of like Trotskyist splinter groups were attacking the PT for doing that. And they were just like, no, come on. What we'll do is we'll guarantee that this is going to continue after the elections. But you should take the money and vote for whoever you want to vote for. It's your right. But one more thing Bolsonaro did, he legalized predatory lending against this 3 months of payments so that the people can get it all at once, like 30% interest, 10% monthly interest. So
hey, got to do a deal.
He's learning a lot from that guy.
Yeah, his economics minister's former hedge fund, BTG Pactual, that gives the loans out.
Oh Lord! I mean, there's so much to get to about the gangster government that he's running. I'd be curious if there's anything that you sort of want to note to the audience, and two, I mean, we have to talk about one of the things I think on international press, and rightfully so, has gotten people worried, are these pretty significant threats that Bolsonaro has been making against the electoral system in Brazil. He said basically he has three options for leaving the presidency. He will either go out arrested, dead, or with victory. I mean, what's the sense here about the seriousness of Bolsonaro's claims? What's the threat level, and what's sort of being done in opposition to his threats against democracy there?
Well, people are taking it very seriously. This is going to be the hardest election since the return to democracy. There's always chaos and crazy things in Brazil elections. In 1989, they kidnapped a very wealthy businessman named Álvaro Diniz, and they captured the kidnappers and forced them to put on PT and Lula T-shirts before the press conference, and beat them until they agreed to lie that they did it to help Lula. And then that came out as being a farce like a year after the election. So there's always crazy stuff going on. Not just, where's this siren coming from?
Oh, sorry.
This is a soundtrack to what I'm saying about alarm elections. Okay. So, for the last year, not just Lula, not just Bolsonaro, but, some of his top generals are saying we're just, they've been preemptively saying that the electronic voter system is flawed. We want to be able to, the military should be able to take over the control of the vote tallying, as if they had any commitment to democracy, since they outlawed it from 1964 to 1985, basically, when they had a dictatorship. There's violence. There've been, the treasurer for PT was assassinated at his own 50th birthday party in front of his children by a guy who was just yelling Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro's legalized the entrance of tens of thousands of guns into the country, and they have these gun clubs that basically just serve as political organization centers for fascists. The Nazi parties, illegal neo-Nazi cells have risen by 270% since Bolsonaro took office. A lot of Afro-Brazilian politicians are getting death threats from Nazis all the time. And there were some rallies for Lula. One rally, they flew a drone overhead and sprayed everyone with some kind of toxic pesticide at one rally, and they blew off some, very loud, M80 type fireworks at another to try and scare people. So they're trying to scare people from going out onto the streets in support of Lula. It's not working that well. And there's a chance, one of the positive things is that it looks like the military split, because it looks like some of them are getting a little bit worried, but the core military members of Bolsonaro's government are just threatening a coup constantly, which gets us to the Biden administration making a few comments, and progressive Democrats working actually a lot harder to try and send a message to Brazil that they're going to at least partially cut off relations if they don't respect the election results. But the big danger is just Lula wins and then they don't let him take power. That's what the problem is.
I mean, and the military factor, not to be too analytical about this, but that's key in any kind of crisis situation, is if the military feels like you're the guy to back. And one of the things that I remember from very early on in the Bolsonaro presidency was that he had started to bring in a lot of military figures into government, which was something that was sort of undone or not done typically because of the history of military dictatorship.
Exactly. He's got more cabinet ministers who are military now than the last two military dictators did.
Jesus Christ, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that was in the Edge of Democracy doc, but it was striking as an American to hear people say, well, we're sick of these politicians. And you have, instead here, it's well, what do? We start a Green Party or a Forward Party. They're oh, just throw it to the generals and they'll kick it out. To have that sort of culture still alive is terrifying.
Well, yeah, it's a different context, but it's very similar to Trumpism in many ways. And I think in the U.S. they'd say, "Oh, turn it all over to the private sector," or something.
That's their religion.
And bullshit like that.
Or the stacked judiciary. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, but there's been significant pushback. I mean, you covered for TeleSur, I believe, these student protests, which were quite inspiring.
There's a lot of pushback, and also Lula just very cleverly has all of a sudden just convinced a large section of the elites that they shouldn't back Bolsonaro. And it's so ridiculous. But there's this organization called the Federation of Industries of São Paulo. São Paulo is the industrial heart of Brazil, right? Historically. And they were the main some of the main architects behind the 2016 coup against Dilma Rousseff. One of the things they did was they put this giant inflatable duck. It was yellow at all the protests, and they were like giving out free champagne in front of their headquarters. And what happened since the coup is so many factories have shut down in Sao Paulo that now the heads of industry are like, wait, hold on a second. And so Lula met with them and was like, this is how we're going to reindustrialize Brazil and the state of Sao Paulo. And even though they're like factory owners and industry owners, all of a sudden they've switched sides. Like they supported Bolsonaro. And so they just wrote this letter for the rule of law and Brazilian democracy that was read out loud in universities across the country a couple of days ago, last week, and as part of this nationwide protests. So like they've just switched sides because I don't know why, Rousseff didn't make this connection to them back then. It's like if they start privatizing everything and implementing austerity cuts, there's going to be no more consumer base to buy the products you manufacture. You guys are all going to go out of business. And so,
That's why
they were like, "Oh, really? Well, it's a new director, right? I mean, the director who was directing at the time of the coup is still super anti-Lula, but all of a sudden they're on the side of PT, and they're a major force in Brazilian politics. And with them coming over to the side of Lula, other elites have come over, and they're saying, look, Bolsonaro is we don't like Lula, but we got to do something to maintain democracy in this country.
That's just a wild dynamic because it's like, they're not trying to do anything radical. They're just trying to keep things working. And there's an LBJ tape, Lyndon Johnson talking to some George Smathers, some Florida senator in 1960s, talking about the Goldwater race. And they're saying like, look, I need people to have money so they have money to spend at my grocery stores. Like, right. And it's like, and Goldwater just wants to slash everything. So people can't even spend that stuff. It's wild that it just keeps recurring. You have like sort of sensible, and like I don't want to call Lula capitalist, but like the sensible, like let's keep the markets, like people are able to like sustain themselves to the extent they have to, versus like let's just cut this stuff off right now. It's wild.
This idea that you have to cut spending during a recession, it's like the most idiotic thing in the world. Like, because rich people just hide their money. The only people who actually spend money are working class and poor, really. Proportionately speaking, right? I mean, people spend some money, but
and we have to act dumb about this, but like even economists, they have velocity of money as like a concept. Like they know that this is happening, but we have to pretend otherwise because really what we want to do is make sure poor people are the ones carrying the brunt of everything.
Yeah, that's just absurd.
Well, I mean, talking about absurd in a different way. I don't worry, y'all. We're gonna get to Lula in a minute and talk about some of the good stuff. But I think it's worthwhile for people to get the picture, not only for watching this election as it's ongoing, but also understanding, hopefully if Lula wins, which it looks like he will, and there's not some kind of fascist coup to prevent him from taking power, what he's going to be inheriting is going to be, a very different situation, both economically and politically, than what the PT left to Bolsonaro. But I was wondering, Brian, if you could just talk a couple minutes about the Central, the kind of centrist alliance that has really gained a lot of power because of the way that they've been able to position themselves under the Bolsonaro administration.
Well, these people have never lost power, really. This is the descendants of the slave owners, the oligarchies. It's coalitions of regional power bases that in most places trace their family history back to big slave owning plantations, right? And so they were major factors in the Lula presidency. Lula tried to govern with as few of them as possible until this first scandal hit called the Mensalão scandal. And then he needed the MDB party, the PMDB. The PMDB was the official opposition party during the dictatorship. The official government party was called Arena, which then turned into PFL and then DEM. And now it's called Union Brazil because it merged with another right-wing party. both of these parties together, that's like the main brunt of the Central. Okay, so Lula just brought in the official opposition party from the dictatorship into his coalition. He refused to bring the actual like government dictatorship party. It was the first time since the end of the dictatorship that that party was not part of the coalition. You know, it's part of the coalition now, and they're just very, you know, really powerful. They run, you know, they run a lot of states and cities and things like that, the old-fashioned like machine politics way. And so one of the reasons they haven't been able to impeach Bolsonaro is because he dished out billions and billions of dollars of pork to all these congressmen and women and senators from these. They call it the Centron, but it's really like center to far right. You know, I don't know why it's called the center, but that's just part of that goalpost moving thing you see in the U.S. now, where Joe Biden's a communist.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I would like to get a little bit to this campaign, and if you're okay, we might go a couple minutes over. But I'd love to start with this video here of Lula returning to his original home, and I think we'll just play a bit of the interviews in Portuguese. If you could give people a general sense after, Brian, that would be helpful.
I'm narrating in English, but then all right, just play a second of the interview. I'll explain what it was, and you can move on to the next one.
Brazil's former President Lula is leading in all polls for this year's presidential elections. This week he started a 2-day tour of Pernambuco state, on the land he was born in outside of the hill town of Garanhuns, where his cousins have restored his mother's old house.
E é muito simbólico para nós. Lula está aqui em Caeté.
She's a leader of the MST, Landless Rural Workers Movement. And she's just saying that it's symbolically important for Lula to reconnect with his roots as he's starting this presidential campaign. Her name's Rosa.
With dozens of his cousins, nieces, and nephews, Lula went to an outdoor arena and addressed a crowd of thousands who'd come out to see their hometown's most famous former resident.
A gente sabe as dificuldades que a gente enfrenta por ser nordestino. A gente sabe a dificuldade que a gente enfrenta.
He's talking about all the racism against people from the Northeast in Brazil and why it's so important that Lula represents them. And that he defends, defending the working class as well.
Tens of millions of Brazilians now facing food insecurity due to the Bolsonaro administration's disastrous neoliberal economic policies, Lula took advantage of his short time back in the land of his childhood to remind everyone of the injustice of hunger.
Ora, por que uns podem ter tudo e outros podem ter nada? Como é que uma pessoa pode comer 10 pães por dia e a outra passa 10 dias sem comer pão? Como é que país que é o maior produtor de proteína animal do mundo, as pessoas vão no açougue pegar osso para comer, carcaça de frango, pé de frango, pescoço de frango?
Former President Lula will spend Wednesday in pre-campaign events in Recife. Brian Mier, TeleSur, Garanhuns.
Okay, I just realized my mic was off when I was narrating Lula.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
Okay, so what Lula was saying was, why can someone eat 10 pieces of bread in a day and someone else doesn't have any bread? Why does the country that's the world's largest exporter, in the country that's the world's largest exporter of animal protein, are people buying things like bones and chicken feet in the supermarket? Once again, using everyday language to give some interesting lessons about economics, always.
I mean, so you've been obviously watching Lula around for many, many years. Could you give us a sense of, where he's sort of focusing this campaign? I think it's very notable where, he's sort of launching and what he's centering there. But two, if you feel like there's any kind of difference or renewed energy in Lula's kind of leftist politics going into this one.
Yeah, I think he's definitely taken a turn left in terms of imperialism and stuff, but this is a kind of a compromise. This move he did of taking his historic enemy from the Centrão and putting him on the vice presidential ticket and showing that he's big enough not to be angry at people or hold grudges is actually kind of like a master political stroke, because it's brought all these people into the coalition who wouldn't be otherwise. And remember, I don't know if you remember, but the first time he was elected, he sent a card, wrote a letter to the Brazilian people saying, look, I'm not going to be as left. wing as you expect. I'm not going to default on the loans to the IMF and things like that. I'm going to focus my energies on eradicating hunger. Mm-hmm. And so he made a bunch of sacrifices, but he did actually literally eradicate hunger. And hunger was a really big problem. So I have a feeling that it's going to be a similar situation where in order to hold together this coalition, he's going to have to, he's promising to undo all the labor reforms. I bet there's some kinds of compromises made in renationalizations and labor reform undoing. I bet it's going to be not 100%, but it's still going to be very significant. And he's talking about redoing the labor laws in a way that there's more care taken to gig workers and reducing their work week to 44 hours and things like that, that weren't in the old labor code. So I have a feeling that it's not going to be a radical left government. On the other hand, he's not going to jump hook, line, and sinker in alliance with the United States on foreign policy at all. He's going to maintain Brazil and is non-aligned. And people are going to complain about him a lot, but if he's managed to take power, he's going to end up significantly reducing poverty, generating a lot of jobs, and increasing opportunities for education for poor and working class like he did last time. And also slow down and make major steps forwards, in fact, in environmental, reduction of greenhouse gas, which Brazil's the world leader in during his presidency, which a lot of people overlook as well, in greenhouse gas reduction.
I'm just curious, as to what specifically that, because I keep reading about, in like The Guardian and elsewhere, that he's making a lot of environmental pledges, but I'd be curious if you could give us any sense as to what materially he's actually talking about there.
Well, first of all, if you look back at his last presidency, what they did was they massively increased the budget for all of the regulatory agencies, which enabled them to shut down the kinds of illegal mining and logging that are out of control right now because Bolsonaro gutted all of the regulatory agencies. They also spent billions of dollars on wind and solar energy, and they transitioned. This isn't like incredible or anything, but most of Brazil's electricity comes from hydro, which is very controversial. But they started phasing out these mega hydro projects. Unfortunately, Belo Monte still went through during Dilma Rousseff presidency, but in favor of these micro hydroelectric generators that don't interrupt the full flow of rivers, which is better for the fish and environment and stuff like that. But I would imagine he would just step up on all of that, the things he had done before. If that had been continuing, Brazil would have a much higher percentage of solar. And I'll give an example, like the public housing. So at one point, the Workers' Party just said all public housing. And they built millions of units of public housing has to be solar powered. So all the public housing had solar panels on its roof. My mother-in-law lives in one of these houses, ownership-based public housing, right? So these big, sweeping bureaucratic decisions that you say. Another thing they did was they said that they passed a national transportation code, which said mayors have to prioritize pedestrians, bicyclists, and public transportation over the automobile. And only some cities paid attention to the law. But if he took power, they would put more pressure on mayors to obey the transportation code. Like São Paulo reduced its car fleet by 20% as a result of this.
Wow.
So these kinds of things, nothing I'm not saying he's going to just snap his fingers and Brazil's going to be all running or something, which is what some American academics think third world countries should lead the world in for some reason. Why hasn't?
Don't get me started on that, Brian.
Yeah, why isn't Bolivia just, if they're so environmental, why isn't it all solar now? They're peripheral capitalists.
I mean, I do think it's important for people to not fall into that kind of trap. But that's a whole other episode, frankly, the kind of expectations on the developing world. On that, I mean, I think we got a good sense of who Bolsonaro is, both when he first ran and as president. but I know it's still early days for like the official campaigning season, and I'm sure we'll definitely get you on before the vote to sort of give people a sense of it as it's actually ongoing. But like, what's your sense on like what Bolsonaro is sort of pushing? I know it's sometimes hard to talk policy wise because it's a little bit more of this than anything concrete. But if you could give us a sense as to what he's sort of running on, I'd appreciate that.
He's running on good versus evil. Really, like the PT are devil, satanic worshipping, communist. Lula's wife is a satanic worshiper because she practices candomblé, which is like Santeria. That's the Latin Afro-Latino religion. His wife, Bolsonaro's wife, exorcised the Brazilian equivalent of the White House last week. PT party, the Workers' Party, wants to force everyone to have abortions. They want to force your children to be gay. This kind of stuff. That's what he's running on. Literally, it's disgusting.
So Newsmax,
Chicago school. It's Milton Friedman.
Yeah, I mean it's good to see the right wing is so aligned, because that's exactly what. Like, it's funny, like the satanic stuff is interesting because I feel like America, we like to play a little bit coy and act as if like certain populations are being figurative when they say satanic, but no, some of these people actually mean like this are satanic parties.
Yeah. It's so stupid that people don't want to believe it.
Yeah, exactly.
People are thinking, but it's true.
And I mean, and this goes hand in hand with like this huge evangelical movement that's been sort of exploding in Brazil over the recent years.
Except Lula's been working hard with the evangelicals. Good. And then like a bunch of them, maybe 40% of them who voted for Bolsonaro last time are going to vote for Lula this time around. Because he's just using Book of Matthew, Yeah.
No, play the game. I mean, and I don't mean to be like against Haddad, who ended up losing to Bolsonaro, but I remember him when he came to New York, coming and talking with Varoufakis. And, don't get me wrong, what happened there was ridiculous. The campaign was horrific. But, Haddad was complaining about like the bots and the evangelical movement, and Varoufakis, who I have disagreements with, but he had a good response to him. He's like, well, we just have to beat them. Like at a certain point, you can't just be like, oh, everyone's far-right evangelical now. Finding a way like Lula's doing to try to bring those people in, I think, is the solution rather than, sitting out on the sidelines and complaining.
Yeah, there's a great biography of his, which I hope comes into English, by a long friend of his who's known him for like 40 years, Fernando Moraes, who just said Lula from jail was just really pissed off at the way Haddad's campaign was trying to take the high road the whole time. That being said, though, when they first polled, when Haddad came in 1 month before the elections, when they canceled Lula's candidacy, he had to come in out of nowhere. He was polling at 9%. And so the fact that he ended up with like 45% still pretty good considering that situation. But he could have been, instead of like, oh no, that's not true, I'm not going to convert your 5-year-old to different gender with our government gender panel. Instead of saying like, no, they made up, he should have been hitting back at these people, And instead he was just trying to take the high road the whole time, unfortunately.
Well, just in the last moment before we let you go, I mean, we've both sort of implied that we think there's a very good chance that Lula's able to win this, if not in the first round, in total. I'd just be curious if you had any kind of examples or things that you've been looking at that sort of make you feel confident, saying that. I think I was reading in the New Statesman, or maybe it was the Guardian, forgive me for whichever British publication it was in, one of the informal polls was that they were selling way more Lula towels than Bolsonaro towels at different like beach shops around town. But I'd be curious if you have any sense, any factors that are sort of making you feel very confident about this Lula campaign.
One thing that makes me feel more confident than normal is if you look at the history of U.S. intervention in Brazil and Brazilian elections, there's always some kind of U.S. intervention. The fact that some people in congressional cabinets, staff, who are friends with Michael Brooks, who listen to the Michael Brooks show, who remember all of the stuff Michael Brooks always said about Lula, are working behind the scenes to try and pass laws and bills saying that the U.S. is going to refuse to deal with Brazil if Bolsonaro doesn't recognize the results of the elections. That gives me some hope, And they're working, and you see some Congress people coming in who aren't even that progressive getting on board with this now, So I just think that they're not powerful enough. The progressive Democrats aren't powerful enough to push through the legislation, maybe. But if they're just doing their best to let Biden know, they're going to make a lot of noise if he recognizes a coup in Brazil this time. They're not going to be caught, with their blinders on like they were in 2016 when everyone was afraid to associate with someone who'd been publicly accused of being corrupt or something. Like this time around, there's a good 30 or 40 progressive Democrats who are paying close attention to this. And a lot of that has to do with Michael Brooks. So that, I think, is something that makes me feel good that we didn't have in 2016.
Interesting.
No, totally. Well, Brian, I really appreciate you so much, and appreciate you spending time with us and all of your work. And hopefully we'll have you back on before the election, and definitely have you back on afterwards so we can do a final Lula Libre cheers, baby.
Great. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, folks, we are back. Sorry again for my audio. I've located the source of the problem, which appears to be a cable, which I only have one other cable, and that one is also one that's bent. So, anyways, that's a great interview, and it was good to hear, the cause for optimism. That is something that matters with regards to Congress, like where certain staffs are on certain issues, forecloses other possibilities from, like, say, like the John Bolton types and those sorts of folks. And it is something that, hey, look, we're going to talk about false prophets and folks who are, ostentatiously taking strong foreign policy things, but like, it's doing stuff like that really matters. So, yeah, I don't know. It just crapped out. As you heard, it worked fine. And actually, can you hear me a little bit better now? It worked fine yesterday in the interview, and I'm a little
We'll figure it out during the break. But no, sorry, I just bring it up because I thought it was funny. Like, I don't mean to take away from your point. It's a big one. I mean, like, I think what Brian there is saying is true. And like, this is why doing some of this stuff and like being active and talking to folks really does matter, because there has been a shift, particularly amongst like congressional staffers. And like, that doesn't mean we get everything that we want, but it means that, maybe some kind of Democratic Congress people who might not normally be paying attention to this, or who, as Brian said, like might be afraid of being associated with somebody who is, quote unquote, in trouble for corruption. Now they're aware about it, and like there's been more and more demands for proper investigations into the FBI's role in the coup there, and I don't think that there's a lot of appetite from like the higher ups in both FBI and State Department actually play ball with Bolsonaro, because some people don't like want to make this argument, but I think honestly, like the people who wanted this to happen sort of got what they wanted. Now they could always want more and get more, of course, but I don't think that they're done trying to play games in Brazilian democracy, but there might be less appetite to use Bolsonaro himself as like the force to do that.
I mean, it's the same thing with Trump, right? Like, the Republican Party isn't done, like, even contesting presidential elections and throwing them to a stacked judiciary and going over even the Electoral College. Things like that are still definitely in the game, but do they do that for Donald Trump? Like, no, I mean, Donald Trump, you just gave them all the Supreme Court justice they want. If Trump was smart, he would have waited until term 2 before seating Amy Coney Barrett, because then, January 6th could have gone. I mean, the calculus would have been slightly different. But yeah, Bolsonaro, like, sorry, but like, there is a level. It is like corporations are too woke. They won't let us cook like that, and you guys, those sorts of figures are liabilities. They draw too much negative attention. You need things to like have a veneer. Like, that's why Obama was actually really good for all this stuff, because he seemed on your side and everything was competently run. So you didn't have, like, I don't know, Trump shooting jump shots of paper towels into people in Puerto Rico and stuff like that.
That was a day. That was a day. Well, y'all, we got more to get to, and plus we got Jordan Peterson, your calls and Discord questions in the post game. Before we get to this last segment, Matt, if you want to futz and maybe see if you could like reset your mics because it's popping a little bit, I'll take people to the store right quick. Y'all, we got our shirts and hats out. We also have a spiffy new website. I hope y'all like my design. It's pretty bare bones, but if you go over to leftreckoning.com, you can go to LR store, and we have the LR on the road t-shirt. We have the Left Reckoning trucker cap, which Matt is wearing right now. And we also have the Big Tex tank, which Matt has been modeling a little bit of. We need to get some high-res photos of him in it. But really, all of the support helps us out, particularly in this next phase that we're sort of planning out for this channel and the show. So if you are so inclined, these are good looking items. They're nice. They're high quality. A lot of merch sucks, I got to be honest. But I think ours is pretty damn good. So you go over to leftreckoning.com/store. And if you already got yours, please tag us on, Twitter and on Instagram. And let's share some of those photos of folks out on the road. I know we got one from Sean today, our good friend up in North Texas, looking mighty fine in his Left Reckoning trucker cap. So let's do it.
Yeah, and I don't know if maybe I have to talk a little bit quieter, or is that a little bit better? But I am liking how all the not to be super creepy and data capitalist about all this, but I am liking all the different various places that people are ordering stuff from. We should do like a little state by state, like, maybe that would be too creepy. Like, hey, we see you, Virginia. We see you,
should let people
Tennessee.
know, but it is nice to know that we have listeners tuning in from all over the country, which is always the goal of Left Reckoning. And so that's made us very happy to see that these shirts haven't just been going to New York City, though we appreciate all of our good friends and fans, including Matt, who are up there. It has been nice to seeing friends all across the South in particular. But yeah, Matt, we have this last segment. Do you want to introduce it for everybody?
Yeah, so this is, in the line of a guy, like, we're talking about charlatans, Blake Masters, those types of folks. I also think, like, Josh Hawley, somebody who makes certain interesting positions in foreign policy. Somebody has come full circle in this sort of genre, and her name is Tulsi Gabbard. I want to first play with you something that I wasn't aware of. So Tulsi, people might not know, filled in for Tucker Carlson on Fox News this week, which, some people were surprised at. I wasn't surprised. And I always say, like I said earlier, I thought I was the old hat because, like, I remember Tulsi immediately, like, originally as an enemy. She was somebody who was trolling Barack Obama because she wasn't saying a radical Islamic terror. More on that in a second. But first, I just want to play this clip from 1998. This is about Hawaii Amendment number 2.
Each of us has the right to marry, but we don't have the absolute right to marry anyone we want.
That is Mike Gabbard, that is Tulsi Gabbard's father.
We don't have the absolute right to marry anyone we want. For example, I'm not allowed to marry my daughter or my son.
I can't marry my sister or my brother.
And I can't marry Kimo. And I can't marry my dog. This doesn't mean we don't have civil rights. Don't open the door to weird marriages. Don't let homosexuals force their values on the people of Hawaii. Vote yes on the marriage amendment.
And so that is the I should have known. Owen Higgins reminded me that he was aware of this part of Tulsi's background. I mean, I knew about like the cult stuff and like the Hindu nationalist stuff. There is a cult leader that she was with who's saying just awful, repugnant things about AIDS. But it's interesting to me that this sort of comes in the. Well, let me back up. Here's Tulsi. I also want to play this on the Obama thing, because just to address the gay marriage thing first, I guess. In 2020, when she ran for president again, she said, "Sorry about all that. When I was in the army, I saw how bad it is that governments try to force their beliefs on people. So that's why I support gay people now." And she also said some stuff about working with alongside gay and lesbian service members. But again, like even that, you can kind of see where she comes into this sort of like it's coming at it from a libertarian fashion. But I also just want to play for folks, and I won't be able to hear this. Yeah, I'll play it anyway. This is Tulsi on not on Sean Hannity, on CNN, talking about what she's really concerned about with foreign policy. This is a person who is portrayed by some as like an anti-imperialist. So here's what I remember originally from Tulsi.
And what is so frustrating now, as we look at the situation there, our administration refuses to recognize who our enemy is. And unless and until that happens, then it's impossible to come up with a strategy to defeat that enemy. We have to recognize that this is about radical Islam. This is as much a military war as it is an ideological war. And we've got to understand what that ideology is and challenge it, understand it, so that we can.
And so let's just break that down a little bit. Like, this is an ideological war. We need to like think about it on those lines to get serious about it. Imagine, say, Catholic Ireland versus Protestant Ireland. Is that really the best way to think about Northern Ireland? Well, let's get deep down into the ideologies here, see what is making, or is maybe the colonial history, are maybe those sorts of things maybe a little bit more explanatory, right? So this is posturing a seriousness, but it is just a reactionary, like Hawk. And she's probably, we know she said some good things about drones and about forever war. But I will say, like, I think you can scan a lot of that stuff and see somebody who's less concerned that there's war and more about like how there's war.
And I think that's an important point. I know that's something we brought up a lot on TMBS too. And like, I just want to say about her family stuff, like, I'm totally sympathetic to somebody who might want to make the argument that, oh, well, you're a child and your family's sort of pushing these things on you. I 100% recognize that. And I think that's a very valid point. But then what matters is what you do with the rest of your life when you are an adult and you have the decision and the ability to make different kinds of choices. And the point of bringing that up is not so much to say, oh, well, she's tainted from the get-go. It's actually to say, look, here's where she's, coming from. And did she do a lot later in her life to try to rectify that? It seemed when it was very politically advantageous to her, she started to switch gears on that, it had a little bit less to do with her sort of coming to different conclusions and, the water flowing a different way.
Exactly right. I mean, here's how a CNN put it. During her run for state legislature in 2002, Gabbard told the Honolulu Star Bulletin, "Working with my father, Mike Gabbard, and others to pass a constitutional amendment to protect traditional marriage, I learned that the real leaders are willing to make personal sacrifice for the common good. I'll bring that attitude of public service." So she ran on this. Right. This was, it's one thing to like come from a bigoted or like traditionally conservative household. Like, I know plenty of people like that. That's a family that I come from, very Catholic, religious, but they weren't politicians. Like that, right? Like that's a slight difference, right? Like your house, and so she says this. I grew up in a very conservative household. multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-faith, also political. And when you are a politician, that stuff I think really matters, especially when you run on it. So diverse in our makeup and diverse in our views. And I held views growing up that I no longer hold. Citing her deployment overseas, Gabbard says again, she saw the destructive effect of having governments who act as moral arbiters for their people. Now that brings me to what she's been doing recently, which is standing up for DeSantis and the say gay stuff. Because you could very easily, say that, I mean, she is saying that that's what the government's doing. You're trying to force what she was saying back in the day, she's saying homosexual extremists. She apologized for that language because you can't say that in 2022 anymore. But this is what she was doing April 19th. On Sean Hannity's program in response to the Don't Say Gay stuff. This is, one of her early auditions.
If I'm hearing you correctly, I hear that you support the bill in Florida, the parents' rights bill. And this idea, I'm not exactly sure where this imperative came from to teach kindergartners and first and second and third graders about sexuality at all or transgenderism at all. And it seems that you take a sensible point of view, that you support the parents' rights to raise their kids the way they see fit. I agree with you, but I think you are at great odds with your own party on this. But I think you're in the majority with the American people. So how does that impact the election?
Yeah, Sean, I'm not a political pundit, but I can say very clearly, yes, I support that bill that passed in Florida, and I think, frankly, it probably didn't go far enough. It's stopping at third grade. It should have, frankly, gone farther. But this is not a partisan issue. This is about challenging. I don't know, 12th grade? How do you determine this?
While kids are...
Exactly.
Let the parents take care of it. Now, schools can offer after-school opt-in sexuality classes if they want, and parents can opt in if they're uncomfortable, right? Would that be fair?
I think that's fair, but look at education. I think you're going to the core point here is, what is the role of government? What is the role of these schools? It's to teach reading, writing, civics, the Constitution, Bill of Rights, math, actually raise the literacy rate in our kids. Schools and the government should not be getting in the way of parents raising their kids and imparting their values to them.
First of all, when she says she's not a pundit, she's something worse. She's a fucking politician and a climber, right? So no honor there. Second of all, I definitely agree that there needs to be a role in a democracy for conversations about how we're educating our children. But the argument that she's making there is the most conservative one, right? Which is that it is it begins and ends with the family. It's no, that's why we have social schools instead of home schools, is so that we're all sort of being educated and enculturated and understanding in a certain society that we're all creating together, right? I don't think there's no place for saying, I think it's very important actually, that we have a lot of opening and democracy for people to be able to influence these things. But you can see where she's going there. It's not about, having a fair conversation about these kind of things. It's actually top down kind of mandates the complete opposite of what, she, portrays that her argument is.
Yeah, I mean, this is an extremely right-wing position, and there's a lot of talk about groomers and the right-wing Jack Posobiec, Cernovich, libs of TikTok, Colleen teachers groomers. Let's be very clear about one thing: that the people that have the position that Tulsi Gabbard has are the ones who are delivering for groomers. I'm going to share this article from the Council of Europe. And if you want to go with Tulsi Gabbard, Marjorie Taylor Greene over the Council of Europe, that's fine. You can do that. I'm going to be here for the other people that make it clear that that's what you're doing. I have this article here: comprehensive sexual education protects children and helps build a safer, inclusive society. Let's go to that paragraph here. In 2019, a draft bill labeled "Stop Pedophilia" was put forward in the Polish parliament by a group of citizens. It envisages the introduction of harsh penalties, including possible imprisonment for anyone acting in the educational context or on school premises who propagate or approves the undertaking by a minor of sexual intercourse or any other sexual act. I expect this is a letter from somebody. I express serious concern that the bill may be used to effectively criminalize the provision of sexuality education to school children. Most recently, the president of Poland, running for a second term, made a campaign pledge to essentially forbid schools from teaching LGBT issues in sexuality education classes. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. It's time to set the record straight. UNESCO has spelled out the aims of sexuality education as teaching and learning about the emotional, psychological aspects, blah, blah, blah. Where's the thing I want to say? Oh, yeah. Teaching and learning about emotional, physical, and social aspects of sexuality. It aims to equip children and young people with knowledge, skills, attitudes, and values to empower them to realize health, well-being, and dignity. And I'm looking for, there is I'll link to this. But basically, the idea is simple. Knowledge is power, and knowing this stuff and what's appropriate actually guards you against people who are trying to prey on you. And so the earlier, and you can look up the experts, right? This stuff is actually important to give to kids outside. And when you say, no, that's just the parents, what you're doing is putting, especially kids that live in situations where they are preyed upon, and religious fundamentalists, like we know that religious households have a lot of this going on precisely because of this. And you have to defend the state's ability to educate kids about this stuff, because otherwise they won't have any other sources.
And I know you've linked to this, but up in Keller, Texas, just a little bit north of Cowtown, Fort Worth, there's now been a decision to basically ban and pull off the library shelves all of the books that have been challenged, regardless of whether or not they have been, cleared, through the democratic process of deciding which books are appropriate for teenagers and young kids, right? It's just like, if you want to talk about what's happening in schools right now, it's complete nonsense to sit here and say there's been this kind of radicalization of students going on through teachers, when in fact it has actually been this very, very well organized right-wing movement to completely eradicate a vast majority of parts of our history, parts of our literature, parts of our culture from even being discussed in school because of their own bizarre personal beliefs, right? So it's not a question even about, an individual family making decisions for their own kids, because they're making that decision for everyone else's fucking kids too right now. And that's what is actually happening in school districts across this country, particularly in red states.
Yeah, and I have that. I mean, contrary to what the research carried out at national and international levels, it demonstrated the benefits of comprehensive sexuality education, including delayed sexual initiation, reduced risk-taking, increased use of contraception, and improved attitudes to sexual and reproductive health. I mean, that's where we're at. And we're seeing a modern, basically equivalent of book burnings, where you have just parents taking lists from these, sort of, libs of TikTok and all these other places, to go to their school board and say, hey, the librarian's got to remove this stuff. And the fundamental subtext of that message is for any child who thinks they might be gay and realizing that when they're a teenager, which I'm not gay myself, but I take it a lot of people starting to have concerns about that age, saying that's a problem that's actually not allowed for discussion. And that, I mean, I shouldn't need to spell it out even any further than that.
I think that's right. Well, y'all, we got more debunking to do over in the post game. We got a pretty good, juicy Jordan Peterson segment that Matt and I will be breaking down for y'all a little bit. We'll also be taking Discord questions and phone calls. If you want to leave us a voicemail, you can leave it at 1-940-289-7234. That's 1-940-289-7234. We'll be popping over there in about 10 minutes or so. We're going to try to see if we can work on Matt's audio just a little bit. And we'll see y'all soon. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate you, Matt.
See you, folks.